The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is the Salt and Light Express.
Good evening, everyone. If you're noticing that my background's a little bit different tonight, and if you're noticing perhaps a little bit of lag in the connection, it's because I'm actually in the Smoky Mountains. Now, you're not seeing the actual Smoky Mountains behind me, although when my family and I were wandering through the Smoky Mountain National Park today, it did look like that. So I chose this virtual backdrop to celebrate the fact that we are here in North Carolina, Smoky Mountains, at a resort celebrating spring break with our graduating daughter, our freshman son, and tonight, the anniversary, the 19th anniversary for my wife and I. And it seems fitting that we have a guest tonight who's telling a story that ends with a discovery of love. Leanne Walling is the author of The Salt and Light Express, a moving road trip novel about an older woman traveling alone in a small RV to navigate grief, guilt, and questions of faith after the loss of her longtime partner. Leanne's a former journalist, political aide, planner, and consultant who published her debut novel at age 69. And it's a celebrated novel. She brought decades of lived experience into the story that speaks to spiritual seekers, older women, the LGBTQ community, and anyone wrestling with loneliness and belonging. She has an MFA from Drexel University and a rich personal journey through Methodism, baptism, atheism, and the Episcopalian faith. She writes with honesty, nuance, and hope about grief, aging, and the search for meaning in a divided America. On the way down here, I played Paul Simon's Search for America. You all know that song from the 60s if you're of my generation, and see what my daughter thought of it as we were traveling through the states. Well, tonight we're going to get to hear from Leanne Walling, author of Salt and Light Express, and her journey. Welcome to the studio, Leanne.
Thanks, Wade. I'm so happy to be here and honored that you picked me for your anniversary.
Well, we're making it work. So now the backdrop that you have is also virtual, but it's a scene from your book, is it not?
Yeah, that's the Texas Hill Country, which takes up about half of the book. Beautiful part of the country, Kerrville, Texas, Fredericksburg, Texas, San Antonio, and parts of Austin. Just kind of in my DNA. It's where most of my family still lives. So yeah, I love it there.
Now that's sort of central, maybe a little bit more west. Is that right, Texas?
Yeah, it's down. It's South Central Texas, I think. That's where all the horrible flooding was last July 4th, with the summer camps and everything. Yeah. My cousins had to be evacuated during that.
Wow. Well, as we always do on the Created in the Image of God show, we want to know about your personal backstory, your creation story, the circumstances during which, some of those lived experiences that were talked about in your book came about. So tell us a little bit about, your parents, where you grew up, and that journey, that arc that led to the writing of this novel.
Thanks. Well, as you mentioned, I'm 69, so it's quite the arc. But anyway, I'll try to tell you an abbreviated version of it. I was born in Pittsburgh, and my mother and father, my mother was from Texas, like I said, Fredericksburg and Kerrville, Texas, and she met my dad at Randolph Air Force Base. He was in the Air Force, a navigator in World War II. So I go back a ways. But anyway, they moved to Pittsburgh because he got a job there. And I grew up, I started life out as a Methodist. I went to South Avenue Methodist Church in Wilkinsburg. It's a suburb. It's still there, the church. And it was kind of a blur. All I remember is singing in the choir, and we'd sing the Palms on Palm Sunday and the Hallelujah Chorus on Easter Sunday. And that's about all I remember. And then my parents separated, and my dad moved to Laurel, Maryland, which is near DC. And my mother followed him there. And of course, dragged me with her. And while I was there, it was kind of a tumultuous time. She was trying to get back together with my dad, who, as I mentioned to you, ultimately was married 8 or 9 times. I've sort of lost count. But my mother was number 4 and lasted the longest. That's her claim to fame. But anyway, so in Maryland, I went with a friend to a revival at a Baptist church. And, it's the standard altar call, just as I am. And I was, attracted to kind of that. I was attracted to the church and them being so open and, wanting me to be part of their church. And so I went down and became saved and dunked and all that stuff. And I was a Baptist. It wasn't a Southern Baptist church. I think it was Northern Baptist. But, that was a nice little community to belong to. My mother really didn't care if I went to church or not. Neither of them. My dad, called himself an agnostic, and my mother, she had been Catholic, and her parents converted to Assembly of God. And there's a little of that in the book. There's a lot of faith journey in the book that kind of parallels my own. So she finally gave up on my dad and decided to move to Texas. And this was about 1967, 68. And so I went down there thinking I was a Baptist, and there's a lot of churches in Texas. This was Irving. It's a suburb of Dallas. And I had a hard time finding a church home down there. It's not really, it's hard if you're a question asker, if you still have questions and if you still have doubts and you're wondering, well, if you say this, then how can this be true? And that sort of thing. So I kind of floundered all the way through junior high and high school.
Well, I want to pause you there for a second.
Sure.
Because I just had a guest on the show who did extensive research into the Latino Christian community in the United States. She's an expert in that field, and she shared with me, 90% of the Latinos coming into the country were Catholic, right?
Right.
And many of them then transitioned into other churches. And I asked her the question, is this partly, the coming of age and questioning what your parents believed and maybe moving away a little bit from the culture? She said, no, it's actually the opposite. And she said that these churches that they were often joining were very small, whereas the Catholic churches that they came into were very large here in America. And they couldn't find their footing, and they were sort of lost and, would either have to be assimilated, right? You follow me? But then they could join these very small churches of maybe, 20 people, many of them related, 20 to 30 people. And there was a tight Latino community. So I'm just curious, your experience of moving from having had some exposure to the Catholic Church and then, or the Methodist Church rather, maybe with your mother being a Catholic background, and then into even a Northern Baptist church. Was there some of that? Was that community, that small community, part of the draw?
Yeah, the church in Laurel was pretty small and kind of chummy. And I was friends with the pastor's daughter and that kind of thing. And the Sunday school teacher, would always have us over for barbecue. And, it just felt like it kind of felt like a close-knit place. And then every place I tried to go in Texas was, a converted gymnasium and metal chairs and just not feeling very churchy, and just not feeling very warm and friendly. That was part of it. So, I kept going into my freshman year of college at the University of Texas. And then I finally just walked away. I'm like, nobody's looking over my shoulder. I don't really need to do this anymore. I'm not feeling it. And basically for 30 years, I didn't darken the door of a church. I wouldn't say I was an atheist. I probably never would go that far and say that, but I didn't believe in much of anything. And what finally happened was I went to work for the governor of Delaware, Ruth Ann Minter. She was the first female governor of Delaware, and she had her inaugural service in an Episcopal Church in Dover, the capital. And I sort of went there kicking and screaming and plunked myself in the back row and just wasn't in the mood. It was freezing cold outside. And I don't know, it started to speak to me. I was about to, getting close to 50. And I'm like, I should believe in something. This is ridiculous. And there was a big stained glass depiction behind the altar of John the Baptist and Jesus. And I'm just looking at it. And I'm thinking, all these people, a billion people believe this stuff. Some of it, there's got to be a kernel of it or something I can latch onto and, believe. I didn't want to just be a nothing anymore. I wanted to believe in something. So, and it just so happened that the rector of the church just hit all the right buttons during that sermon. And I had kind of forgotten what Jesus was all about, frankly, after being in politics and people like using religion as a weapon and Christianity as a weapon, which is still happening and even worse. She boiled down the basic teachings of Jesus. And I got involved again, like really involved, like senior warden and on the vestry and all that kind of thing. But
our intro to the show about unity and diversity, search for meaning, and so on. We were talking about a number of things. You go on a road trip, right? And your kids are in the back seat most of the time on their phones. But then you say, okay, we're going to have a phone-free hour, right? And we're going to talk, or we're going to listen to something. And we were talking about unity and how important unity is. And we were talking about the difference between spiritual unity and political unity. And here you were, working in the political world, and yet you found faith going to a church. Unpack that a little bit for us. Let it breathe a little bit. What was it? Did you see any distinction there between, the striving for political unity versus a spiritual unity? Because you mentioned, and even if religion isn't being weaponized, it's being co-opted.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. I mean, people talk about conversion and they think of the, aha moment of the altar call or in, just as I am. But I feel like I had more of a real gut conversion, and psychic and spiritual conversion, because I was older. And so I could, read up on everything and read some thinkers and talk to people, talk to the pastor. She's still a good friend of mine. And, they talk about, metanoia, which is the Greek word for conversion. And I really think I experienced it because it was hard to go back. It was hard to go back to politics and do the things that I did in politics. I went and informed my boss, not the governor, but the chief of staff. I said, I can't lie anymore. I can't do it. It's not that we told bald-faced lies, but we tell little white lies and things like that. And I couldn't make myself do it. I just really had a change of heart, probably down to the core. And I think it stayed with me. But yeah, it was to me a really serious change of heart and soul.
Wow. So it is amazing. And there was a comment about the backgrounds being fitting and your story, and we're on this road trip. But so one of the lectures we were listening to on the way did talk about this sort of unity at the societal level, the importance of unity. But at the personal level, what God wants is our heart. And he wants our heart to be pure, a pure place for the Spirit to dwell, right? And you mentioned, letting your boss know, I can't, let's just say bend the truth or misrepresent.
That's a better word.
Right. I can't keep cooking the narrative, right? To
spinning
the narrative, right? And I know that when I resigned from the full-time ministry, it was to separate my faith from my paycheck,
Mhm.
because like I can't stand up and honestly teach the thing you're telling me I have to teach because I don't believe it's fully accurate.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened. And it was kind
Wow.
of the beginning of the end for me in politics, actually. I kind of
So what was that
yeah,
like? What was that like? I mean, because I'm sure that was like a pinnacle in a way of
yeah.
achievement and where you were at, and there's probably many things that you just loved about being able to function at that level and in those circles.
Well, that's I mean, part of the conversion, I believe, was that stuff became not as important to me anymore. The great parking spot at the University of Delaware football game, and the Audi TT convertible, and just having people. It was important to me that people return my calls and stuff like that. All of a sudden, it was pretty. It wasn't important to me anymore, and because I was just headed in a different direction. And so it became really difficult. I didn't last in the office much longer. I parachuted out into an agency, and I became a planner, like chief of planning for the Department of Natural Resources, because planning and sustainability and, helping protect the environment was something I could latch on to, as a creation thing. So yeah,
Wonderful.
so I parachuted out, and people have said, "Can you help run my campaign?" Nope, I'm not interested. I'm out. So
And what year was that? And then how long were you in the planning field?
I think let's see, her second inauguration, or her second term started. That was 2005.
Okay.
And I lasted till about 2007, and then I left and went to an agency. And then I finally retired in 2013. When I turned 57, I retired. I had 20 years in with the
Yeah.
state. So uh,
What was that like, that moment of retirement? Because I know then, we're
weird.
going to get to the point of writing this novel and the
Yeah.
circumstances. But first came retirement then. What was that like?
It was an adjustment because you never. Now I don't really know what day it is or don't care. But the first, few months and years, I didn't really quite know what to do with myself. I felt like I still had to do work-like things, and now that's not a problem. I still do work-like things, but I don't feel compelled to, make a living. I started a couple of businesses. One was a graphic design and website business where I did websites for churches and nonprofits. And then the other one was the planning consulting, where I did some work for towns in Delaware and the University of Delaware. That was fun. Yeah. But finally I just said, I don't really need to do this anymore. So I stopped. And that's when, COVID hit. And, when COVID hit, I'm skipping a lot of years, but it really forced everybody to kind of think about what matters to them, and what they should do with the rest of their lives.
And we'll get to your book, in a moment, but there's a road trip RV aspect. Was that part of what you did as a retired person, or was that more what you would have wanted to do and therefore wrote about? Or
I thought I wanted to do it. I've never been in an RV. I had a lot of help, from people who had, and did a lot of research. And most people think, the experience that's mentioned in the book is very authentic, and they can't believe that I never went camping in one. But no, we did do some traveling, and a lot of reading, and I play keyboards for my church in Rehoboth Beach. And so I just finally learned to adjust and not feel like I had to be doing something, 40 hours a week. But it
so,
took a
so,
while.
so how did COVID impact you personally, and when did the idea come to begin writing this novel?
Yeah. Well, COVID, I was, a full bore Episcopalian up through when the COVID epidemic hit, and a pandemic hit. And then, I don't know about where you were, Wade, but in Delaware, things were really shut down. Super shut down. No church, no nothing, no Planet Fitness or anything for probably a good year. And, Sue and I would stay home and watch the National Cathedral on TV And on Sunday mornings, it was totally empty with just the clergy and a few singers or instrumentalists or whatever for a year. We watched all their Christmas services and by the time 2021 rolled around and into 2021, I didn't feel like I really wanted to go back there. I felt like I'd moved on. So I was really interested in being a musician. So I auditioned at it's probably one of the largest Methodist churches in Delaware. And I auditioned, to play keyboards. And I've been there since July 11th, 2021, playing keyboards every Sunday. But it's a kind of a different experience. The church in Dover was very diverse. It was kind of urban. It was, Blacks and Latinos and gay and straight and old and young and families. This one is it's a retirement community, so it's a little more homogenous, but it's also very inclusive. So, people can kind of live in their questions there. And even at my age, it's kind of a good place to be, because I still have a lot of questions.
Well, and I've got some questions too, but I think this is a good point to go to that commercial break, unless there's anything else you want to add to this segment. And then some of my questions are going to relate to, what you were going through and how that was translated into art in the form of this book that was well received and meaningful to a lot of people.
Sure. Go ahead.
Is there anything you want to add to this segment, or we'll just jump into this?
No, I think we've made it to almost to the present time, so we're good.
Awesome. Well, and what comes next is a little video about that book. And when we come back, we'll talk about it. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Leanne Walling and the Salt and Light Express.
Chris hit the road to heal from grief and guilt. But she found much more. The majesty of Utah's red rocks. The untamed beauty of the Texas Hill Country. She found belonging and understanding and mindfulness. She struggled with faith and with our divisions until finally she found love. Publishers Weekly made the Salt and Light Express an editor's pick and says the novel delivers something truly special. It's available almost anywhere, and it's perfect for book clubs because it takes a journey to finally come home.
Now, did I see a little blurb about something composed by you? Were you involved in the music for that as well, or did I?
Oh yeah, I did. I composed the music for that. Not that I'm a big composer or anything, but I just felt like I wasn't going to use some kind of stock audio or anything for my own book. So I made a little tune. It's called Among the Hoodoos.
I love it.
Yeah.
So what period of time does this cover? And you mentioned an authenticity about the RV experience, but is there also, we had COVID, right? Which was, as you mentioned, everything shut down for a whole year. Does that come into play at all, or is it outside of the COVID world, this story?
Well, yeah, it's mentioned, at the Drexel MFA program, people said nobody wants to read a book about where you're in COVID. No, it's too soon. It was too soon at the time. So, this takes place in 2022. It's really over a 4-month period in 2022. So, but there's, she was shut down. I mean, she does remember being shut down during COVID with her partner, Sally. And, and what they kind of had to go through, sometimes when other people wouldn't take it seriously, and they did. And they were kind of stuck at home waiting for the vaccine. There was a little bit of that, but not too much, because I have a hard time even still thinking about it. And I'm praying that it never happens again, because it was a pretty traumatic period for most of us, I think. Yeah.
Well, and I think it was traumatic for everybody in different ways, wherever you fell on the spectrum of experience, right? And people know from the name Franson, many people that this is a Swedish name, and I think many people know that Sweden was an outlier nation that took a completely different approach to
Right.
COVID and did not go the route of shutting down and locking down at all. And in the United States, my father was in Texas, and I remember him sharing that he would turn his hearing aid off and go into stores without masks, and somebody tried to talk to him, he would just ignore them. And he was he was of the age, of being at risk, right? The risk profiles and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But you had these different viewpoints, and what was happening in the nation, I think, was traumatic for everybody in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that your novel was written right coming out of that. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
is that part of sort of the welcoming of it? Because everyone is, if we're thinking, we are still to a degree trying to process it, what happened and why, and what people did or didn't do and why, and what should or shouldn't have been done, because you had these different reactions in different parts of the country. We lived in and I was part of actually a group of people that had to make some decisions related to a community as to what we would do. And we were in a county that was extremely locked down,
Uh-huh.
and surrounding areas were less so, right? But in our county, they were doubling down on and locking everything down. And the community that I was with, very much was of that persuasion and locking things down even tighter.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas surrounding areas less so, and we're opening things up sooner, that kind of thing. Anyway, our state was, Wisconsin was not completely shut down for a year, but parts of it were shut down longer than others.
Yeah. I think it would have. Yeah.
So the whole nation was emerging from this, and you chose that sort of emerging moment to as a backdrop for the story. I find that interesting.
Yeah, when I started writing it, I made it 2021, and I'm like, no, no, people aren't all the way out of it yet by any stretch. So I bumped it, went back and changed all the dates in the book and made sure that it all made sense, and made it 2022, and especially down in Texas. Yeah, it was in the rearview mirror, So, but I, just back to the kind of the shared experience, I think it would have been so much more healing and healthier if people had the same experience. There was the whole cadre of people who, thought it was a hoax, or, didn't get the vaccine, and kind of slowing it down for everybody, slowing down the recovery for everybody else. And I think that was part of the trauma, that we were so divided over our reaction to it. And that's
Well, I think
book.
there's still processing, there's still discovery and research of data. The vaccines that were rolled out
Mm-hmm.
did not go through the same rigor of standard vaccines, and
Right.
I think that there's still discussion and debate about what was real and what wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we're getting closer, and I don't want to go down the COVID rabbit hole.
Yeah, no.
But maybe we're closer to a shared experience. But maybe both sides are going to have to recognize that maybe they weren't entirely right, and that there would have been a better way to handle it, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And there's more than two sides, I'm sure. Everything always. I love this quote from Einstein: "Things should be made as simple as they can be, and no simpler." Well, we try to make them simple.
We always we seem to want everything black and white and simple, and no nuances for weaklings. So.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so unpack a little bit then. Where did the idea come from? Why did you want to write this novel? And why was it important to you to write this particular story?
Yeah, it started out as sort of a personal sort of thing, that where I almost like a fake memoir, and then as I got into it, what was going to happen in the book was she was going to go back and reunite with her family and try to become part of this family that she hadn't been part of for, 30 or 40 years. And everything was going to be hunky dory, and, she'd find her footing and her place. And And it didn't take long to realize that, one, that was really going to be boring, and two, it wasn't realistic at all. Because I put Chris, the protagonist, in these situations where it just couldn't turn out that way. Her family was evangelical, and they didn't approve of the fact that she was a lesbian, and had a partner for 35 years. And they didn't think that she could be a Christian, and be a lesbian at the same time. And she even had a cousin who asked her, I can't believe they let you all teach Sunday school. And that actually happened to me. The person who used to cut my hair and no longer does, we were talking about teaching Sunday school, and she goes, "They let y'all teach?" Like, yeah, we taught them about, Bible stories, and fed them juice boxes and did crafts. What else do you think we did with these kids? They were in third grade. It was, it was just all we could do to kind of keep their attention for an hour. So, some of the experiences are kind of borderline autobiographical. The theology is definitely me. Trucking off to Texas, and kind of the experience of worrying about going to hell, and wanting to go to heaven. That's something that I think a lot of 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds are worried about, heaven and hell, and how to behave to make sure that you don't go to hell. And then you grow out of, a lot of times, a lot of people I grew out of that. I was worried kind of more about how I lived my life on earth, the reign of God, or the reign of heaven, or however you want to call it, and how you live your life here. But the Salt and Light Express is the name of her camper. And of course, that comes from the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the world. You are the salt of the world. Oh, salt of the world. Salt of the earth, and I am the light of the world. So much. My Bible quoting days are long past. But yeah, it was you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And then you were the light.
Let's spend a moment on that, because I should have realized that, but I didn't.
Really?
Right?
Okay.
And now I'm excited, right? Because these two analogies, and could have called it salt, light, and leaven, right? Because they're different, right? But salt and light, okay, so they're used in a similar way, but they're also extremely different, right? They're like two very different characteristics. You're the salt of the earth, and he's not only is Jesus the light, you are the light, right? You are to become like lights, right? And don't hide your light under a bushel.
Or a bushel, right?
So we're supposed to be like salt, and we're supposed to be like light. How do you sort of process those two different substances or material analogies in your book? You mentioned the theology is yours. Okay. So unpack salt and light for us theologically in your book.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I never fully understood the whole salt analogy. I love the wording. I'm a New Revised Standard Version gal, and I love the wording of this, Sermon on the Mount. But you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. That I think that speaks to me in terms of you're not meant to go through life being shy or not taking part and not participating. You're meant to participate and get your light out there. So that part really speaks to me.
I'll share a tiny bit from my perspective. One is, I often say you are the light of the world, not the loudspeaker. People can close their eyes, but you can't turn your ears off, right? And so light is non-intrusive. But if you're a loudspeaker, this gets into that thing we talked about co-opting religion and sermonizing, you follow me? And spitting it. But light reveals the truth, right? When the light hits something, it reflects back accurately what it is
Mm-hmm.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
But salt, I think of the phrase, let your speech be grace seasoned with salt, right? So, and a tiny bit of salt. We all know what it's like to have food that's too salty, right? I remember when my little sister made pancakes, and it's like a quarter teaspoon, and she put in a quarter cup, and my dad made a secret pancake to pretend they tasted good. um, just a little bit too much salt, and you've immediately ruined the food.
Mm-hmm.
So the salt has a different purpose. It can
Mm-hmm.
also preserve, right?
Right.
It changes the nature of preserve. So I think of you telling your boss, hey, I can't do this anymore, I can't spin. I'm sure you said it in a nice way, I'm sure you departed gracefully,
Tried
but
to.
the salt was, hey, I have to draw a distinction here.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyway,
I'm sure that there's a big historic context for salt in that time period that
yeah.
we don't feel, in the same way. But yeah, I was a little salty with him when I said because he kind of ridiculed me a little bit, and so I did have to get salty, and then I went off and shone my light, to the
Yeah.
rest of the world after that. So. Uh, there's so many passages in the Sermon of the Mount that it's kind of like a manifesto,
Absolutely.
of how to live your life. And I read it often because I love the language, and I try to live up to it as much as I can.
Well, and Jesus flips the script on so much
Mm-hmm.
of what was accepted and normal in that world that he came to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the Salt and Light Express is making a journey across America, and so
Right.
what's going on then? What are the characters doing as they're traveling through?
Well, she's headed to Bryce Canyon in Utah to spread Sally's ashes because that was their favorite place that they'd ever visited. And she stops at a campground in Moab. It's the kind of first stop. She just basically motors it across the whole country
So why does she have Sally's ashes? Because they were in COVID together, and now
yeah,
Sally's.
Sally was she died in an accident, car accident that was partly Chris's fault because she wasn't paying attention. Now, they were broadsided by a teenager who was texting and drinking, but if Chris had been paying attention, she probably could have avoided the accident. So she carries that guilt with her.
At least she felt like she could have.
Yeah, maybe she couldn't have, but that's guilt for you. So, and she ends up in this campground in Moab with this kind of motley crew of people, including Claire, who's a woman who is traveling away from her own tragedy. Her son was an off-duty police officer who was a black, and he was killed by a vigilante who. A woman, who kind of took her Glock out of her Michael Kors handbag and shot him when he was trying to help somebody in a Walmart. And that was related to COVID because he was confronting somebody who refused to wear a mask and became violent. And he was trying to talk the guy down. And she thought he was the bad guy, and she shot him. So she meets Claire, and they just develop a connection. They become soulmates of sort. And this continues throughout the book until the end. But she meets other people there and she shows she's kind of, snobby and elitist herself, and thinks she makes assumptions about people that turn out to be wrong. And all these people are helping her recover from her grief and her guilt and her loneliness. And she finally realized that even the people that she thought she had nothing in common with, there's actually, a shared humanity, and they're there for her. So then after going to Bryce Canyon, she decides to head south to Texas to try to reconnect with her family, and that doesn't go that well. But she meets the Baptist preacher, Jared, and once again, she makes all these assumptions about what he's going to think about her and what he's going to say and how judgy he's going to be, and he turns out to be a phenomenal friend throughout the book. and he's a great character. I love the guy. And so he talks her into getting a volunteer job at the local library, and they end up they schedule a panel discussion on the Alamo, because there's a lot of revisionist history and rewriting history going on about the Alamo and what really happened and whether they were really heroes or not. And the library director is a Latina, and it just mushrooms into something, this big culture war thing, and turns violent. So that's the big climax of the book, and I'm probably telling you way too much about the book. But
well, no. So
yeah.
I do want to pause you there, because again, this vignette song, Paul Simon, which is so beautifully done.
That's one of my favorite Simon and Garfunkel songs. Yeah.
Right. All Gone to Look for America. Just these vignettes, and you have this sort of the backdrop right there. And there's bus. They're talking about the man in the gabardine suit being a spy, and you're getting this sort of Forrest Gump's backstory right behind them in that moment in time in the turbulent but open 60s. And now in your novel, what have we learned? Well, you've got the whole COVID thing, right? Then you've got racism that impacts police officers and others, and ends in violence and death for Black people, way too often. You've got the racial issues there, with Claire also. I'm assuming that's part of, her traveling with Chris. And then you've got the history, and you've woven all this in, and I'm seeing now a rich tapestry of light being shed on the questions that America and Americans are facing today.
Yeah. And another one of those questions is, what is it, what do you have to do to be considered a Christian in the United States in the 21st century? Chris's faith is pretty boiled down to, I believe in the teachings of Jesus. Shouldn't that be enough? I don't necessarily believe in every word of the Nicene Creed, or I may not believe in every word of the baptismal covenant or whatever. But let
me unpack that for you a little bit as a former minister who has his own journey. So for me, when I resigned from the ministry to separate my faith from my paycheck, it was because I was being told to teach things that I didn't fully believe or accept. Now, we would have been viewed by many as very cultish, and we would have been misunderstood and judged by even our fellow Christians as being legalistic. However, we did not believe in literal hell. And one of the things that I was very aware of was that Christians had been condemning each other to hell for millennia, right? Over the tiniest, pickiest little doctrines. You mentioned the creeds.
Killing each other, over it.
The form of baptism. Again, I didn't know this, but this woman that I interviewed from the Latino community had the blessing of the Catholic Church to even become, in that sense, a member of some of the churches that she was studying and join them and worship with them. But she was told, you may not be rebaptized. You must not be rebaptized by them. And, she explained why, and I get it, right? But now let's talk about Jesus and his teachings, especially in the book of Matthew for a moment. One of the pivotal verses in Matthew is Matthew 7, verse 1. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Whatever standard of judgment you use, that's how you will be judged. This, to me, is perhaps the single most revolutionary statement of Jesus.
And virtually ignored.
Right. So the entire Gospel of Matthew really focuses on judgment. And then when you get down to Matthew 25, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will separate the sheep from the goats. And then you look at, and he says he will separate the nations. So, and I always took that personally, and certainly it does apply at the individual level. But now we have this societal view of unity. What is the societal standard? And if you look at the sheep and the goats, They're incredibly similar, right down to the fact that they both ask the question of Jesus, when did we see you? The sheep and the goats both didn't recognize Jesus coming in his glory.
Mhm.
And this comes after the 10 virgins, all of whom were asleep, right? All 10 of them were asleep. So this is fascinating because the Jews, of course, were all concerned about who's in and who's out. And this is where, in that time, and this is where Christians condemning each other to hell have carried on in exactly that tradition of drawing a circle of exclusion.
Mhm.
And the standard that is revealed in Matthew 25 is the same standard that essentially is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was agreed to at the United Nations level in 1948. So if we want to look for a literal interpretation of Matthew 25 of the sheep and the goats, it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations level. That's the standard the earth has chosen by which it should be judged. And it's a pretty decent standard by which to be judged.
Mhm.
It's just apparently very, very hard for people to adhere to.
Yeah. Yeah. People say, well, I've read the whole Bible, twice, old and new. And I'm like, well, just read don't read the whole thing, read the Beatitudes, for starters, and tell me where you are in all those pronouncements about blessed are the peacemakers and blessed are the meek and blessed are the righteous. And I can't remember them all, but that's kind of the starting point for me.
The meek shall inherit the earth, right?
Right. Yeah, it's the starting point.
Yeah.
And people don't start there. I'm not seeing people start there with those teachings. I'm seeing them start in some, belief system or judgment system. And I just think, I mean, it's not like it's just happening now. This has happened since Jesus, was on the earth. So people are just, setting aside his basic teachings, in your face teachings. It's kind of hard to ignore them, but we do. And that's kind of what I was trying to get to in the book.
So is it fair to say then that one of the reasons this journey is ultimately rewarding for Chris is that she's laying aside her judgments of others, and then that helps her also deal with her own guilt?
Yeah, and the other thing, she's trying to, be more mindful and practice a certain kind of mindfulness. She talks about, centering prayer, and she keeps trying it, and she keeps falling asleep, and she quotes Thomas Merton, the famous quote about, the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion. And she finally gets there towards the end of the book, where she feels like she's centered, and she's more mindful, and she's kind of ready to put all the, the crap of her past behind her, and leave judgment. And she accepts the people that she sort of made assumptions about and herself judged. So like Jared the preacher and others. So I think she comes around, and she becomes a more whole person, and she finally can open herself up to love, and she has the big reckoning at the library, the violence at the library, but it just compels her to just realize how short life is, and she needs to move on and find love. So, but I think the whole book kind of prepares her, and her spiritual journey as well as her geographical journey help prepare her for that.
So have you had a chance to do book signings or whatnot, where you've actually met some of the people that have read the book and gotten to hear from them how they received it and what they got out of it?
Yeah, and I was kind of in a vacuum when I wrote it. I was still in the MFA program, and I I spent a year writing it. I was actually the only person in the program, in that cohort, who actually started and finished a book during the period. But I'm like, I'm paying all this money. I'm going to have a product at the end of it, by golly. And then I spent another year.
You were in the event planning and, organizing and,
Yeah.
consultant. So I guess,
So yeah. And then, I had the book launch at my church, and I sold 58 copies of the book, which is probably my best day. So still, and people, it's gotten really good reviews, from like third-party people, but also really good reviews on Amazon from people I don't even know, Goodreads, who are they find it inspirational. They like the characters, they like the story, they like the spiritual journey, and that's just so heartening to me, because you never know when you write something how it's going to go over. I mean, you like it, and it's you like the story, or you wouldn't have spent all that time writing it, but how is it going to resonate with other people? And it does seem to strike a chord with older women who've seen a lot and done a lot, and are starting to think about, the course of their lives. And it's a great book club book, because a lot of older women are in book clubs, and a lot of older women feel that kind of invisibility that Chris felt during a lot of the book, where she just felt like people weren't paying any attention to her, and they can relate to that. So it's been very well received.
Well, the backdrop in the tapestry is also a lot of difference of opinion, and, as you mentioned in the book, violence and even death.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any haters? Has there been any negative reviews of people that sort of want to attack what you're doing in it?
No, but I'd really welcome that. I would really. I think when it finally gets out there, more in the world than it is, that people are going to take issue with some of the theology in the book, and then my notion and her notion of Christianity and what being a Christian really is. And I would welcome that. I hope they.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you why I ask, and that is that. My story was very autobiographical, including names, dates, places, right? So I also, as you know, I have a challenging background, and I wrote about it. And I actually had this one person who was kind of a stalker, right? Who tried to discredit me and wrote an incredibly negative review. And then there was somebody else who just didn't like the way I portrayed certain people or whatever. And I met a woman on the plane, going somewhere, and I gave her a copy of my book. She's sitting next to her, and I happened to have a copy. I gave her. And she came in and wrote a review on Amazon defending me. And it was very heartwarming that here this person who didn't know me at least took the book at face value, you know what I'm saying, and accepted that what I was representing was a true representation. And so, to your point, that's kind of why I asked if you had, people who did that. But it was very heartwarming to see this sort of stranger who read the book coming in and writing a review and said, "I think you've got it all wrong. This is really what's going on in this story."
Yeah, I think if the book actually starts circulating in Texas more, I gave a copy to the library in Kerrville, which is basically the town where all the Texas stuff takes place. And I see that it gets checked out a lot, but I have, I'm expecting to for it maybe not to go over so well down there. I could be wrong. I mean, I just really wanted to stimulate a discussion about, 21st century Christianity and what it means and what it looks like and what it maybe should look like. And I kind of wanted to write something inspirational and thoughtful and get people to think about, sometimes they just shut down and they don't even think anymore about what they believe and what they might want to question. So that's my goal.
I'm certainly not encouraging anyone watching the show to now go in and post a negative review. And I would hope that wouldn't happen. But perhaps there will be some diverse people, introduced to it through this show. I think there's a diverse audience out there, and I, frequently get people on different sides of whatever issue is being discussed. So
I'd love to hear from both sides or all sides.
Well,
yeah.
wrapping up this segment, we're going to go to another quick commercial break. What else would you like to say about the book before we go into the next segment and talk about what's next for you, and then review some of the audience comments?
Yeah, I think it's important that the scenery and the locations are almost like a character in the book. I've been to Utah 6 times. We went on a trip where we drove around and went to every national park. And there's just something that's a character in the book because it's so awe-inspiring. And both she and Claire kind of lose themselves. They realize they're just blips on the screen, and their problems are blips on the screen as well, in just the majesty and awe of these places that they are. So I think if you like the West, if you like Utah, and you like she's also in Santa Fe for a bit, that you might also like the book because of the locations.
Yeah, you have the vast openness, you have the raw nature of nature in those areas, and just the solitude and connecting with. I refer to the creation as the laboratory, right? We have the curriculum, which is the divine word, the revelation. You mentioned the Sermon on the Mount, that's the curriculum. And then we have to go out into the laboratory, which is the world, and try to do something with that curriculum, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what's next, and then look at some of the audience comments. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Leanne Walling, author of The Salt and Light Express.
In a world where religions often talk past each other, what if we just sat down and listened? Facets of One is a simple devotional, bringing together scripture from the world's faiths, centered on one truth: God is one. From the Bible to the Quran, from Krishna to Christ, each voice speaks in turn, without argument, without division. You don't have to agree on everything. Just be willing to pray, to listen, and to come together. If you're longing for something deeper than noise and division, this is a different kind of conversation. Facets of One. Many voices, one God. Will you start a circle?
So that little book is actually just a collection of 9 devotions. The publication date, I think, has been set for April 21st. I don't think we put anything in the description. So let me, because there was supposed to be a QR code at the end of that video, and I don't think that was updated. So for the sponsor of that ad, write to info@soupllc.com to learn more about Facets of One and get a copy. I think it's going to be something interesting in terms of building those vibrant communities. Anyway, we're back with Leanne Walling, author of Salt and Light Express, and we've just sort of covered the journey in that RV of Chris and Claire and the folks they meet along the way, and the issues that are the backdrop of all of our lives that Chris deals with coming through her own experience. So, Leanne, what is next for you, having completed this novel, having gotten great reviews? Obviously, you want a whole lot more people to read the book, but what else is on the horizon for you?
I just finished my first draft of my second novel, which is called The Next Right Thing. I think I'm sticking with that title. And it's about a group of friends who haven't seen each other for 40 years, who are beckoned back to the deathbed of their favorite teacher who's dying, and all the baggage that they bring back. It's also set in Texas, and they help him solve a mystery that's been tormenting him for 40 years. And there's also kind of an existential relationship crisis going on at the same time. So I think it's a little bit more layered than the first book. I guess you learn things from the first one. And I'm working right now with a revision coach who's helping me figure out, now that I've written the first draft, what do I need to do to it to punch it up and make it even better. But I'm pretty happy with it. It leans more into the LGBTQ relationship than the first one did. The first one sort of touched on it, but it was more focused. Salt and Light Express is more focused on kind of the depth of relationship and friendship between two older women, when this is more of a relationship story and kind of the baggage that happened in college and is still sticking with them 40 years later.
Wow. Sounds fascinating. Do you have a preliminary publication date, or at least a
No,
target?
I hope to finish the revisions this month and then send it out to some people to read, some friends to read it. So probably early next year, I would say.
Okay. Wow.
It's a lot faster than the traditional route. It's an independent, I publish independently, which means I used a consultant to help me design the cover and the inside and kind of help me with all of the, the stuff like the ISBN numbers and that kind of thing. But the Shifting Sands Media is my own imprint that the book was published under. So, but you can get it anywhere. You can find it anywhere.
Yeah, it sounds, I love the premise.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds very intriguing, and can't wait to learn more about it.
Yeah.
So, obviously, the Salt and Light Express can be obtained anywhere as well. I mean, you could walk into any Barnes and Nobles and they can order it for you if they don't have it on the shelf, and get it off of Amazon.com, Barnes and Nobles, any of the online booksellers probably around the world. So, folks, go check that out and make sure that you pick that up. And then familiarize yourself with Leanne Walling's work in anticipation of the next one that's coming out. Let's move to look at a couple of these audience comments. We've got just a few minutes late. Well, we're probably already at time, but this has been so wonderful. We're going to go just a little bit over time, and I hope that our 19th anniversary won't be the last one as a result.
I feel so guilty about that.
No, I'm not. I'm just having fun here. My wife is probably glad to have a little break from all day with me anyway. So, well, first of all, thank you to those who are saying happy anniversary to me. Appreciate that. And those coming in, we've got people coming in from some other nations as well. Here's just a comment early on about your journey. Amazing how kids will find God even when their parents want nothing to do with it. So we didn't really dive into that at all. Did your mother and father, well, they may not have even really experienced your sort of full reconversion.
No.
How did that, tell us just a little bit about how that relationship unfolded over time, and did that end well? I know you had, very difficult circumstances with your parents' divorce, your mom wanting to get back together. That obviously didn't happen. Did you get some resolution on those things?
On my parents, or?
Yeah, your relationship with your parents through those sort of fragmented experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just trying to be a good church. I mean, back then it was just trying to do right behavior, good behavior. And I was still concerned about heaven and hell. And so I was, tried to be more understanding with my mother and what she was going through. So I think it helped her in that regard. It's not like I came home and tried to, drag her to church or save her soul. She was struggling. She was a single mom at a time when this was the early 70s. Even late 60s. So it was a tough time to be a single mom. And I think it helped a little bit that I, tried to see her side of things and tried not to be judgy. But she didn't really care if I went to church or not. So yeah.
Yeah, hard to make that work when it's not a two-way street.
Yeah.
How about this one? Did you ever know prior to 50 that you had a calling of some sort? Or do you feel that today, that obviously you want to be a light and reflect the teachings of Jesus, but was the book infused with sort of a mission and purpose of a divine nature, even to some small degree?
I think so. I think when sometimes when I look back at the pages, I think, wow, I can't believe I wrote that. What was going on when I was writing that? And I do think, whether it's, I do a lot of graphic design and social media for my church. And sometimes I just feel like somebody else is on the keys for me and making things and creating things. I do think that God's a creative force, and not just creation of the world, but creation within you. and guides you if you let it happen. And so yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. I was a journalist for quite a long time. Not quite the same thing, because when you're a novelist, you actually can make up people and situations but yeah,
Which you're not supposed to do in journalism, but some people do, right? There's a whole lot of spin in that.
Yeah.
So what kind of journalist were you? What kind of articles, what area of journalism?
I worked for my first job was at a TV station in Odessa, Texas in 1978. That was my first job out of college. I made $8,000 a year, and I lasted 6 months. And what was interesting about that time was the Bushes were all out there, Jeb and George and Neil, and they were, very friendly guys, and, we'd go out and have lunch and stuff. And so, that was kind of a fun time. And then I decided to become a newspaper reporter. So I worked for some dailies around Dallas, and then I headed east to work for the Delaware State News in Dover, Delaware. I worked there for 10 years. So I was, a cop reporter, a legislative reporter, a court reporter, a little bit of everything, an editor, a features editor, an editorial page editor. I liked moving around and trying different jobs. But
this kind of answers the question here from Irby. But what was it that finally pulled the trigger to go into that MFA and write a novel?
Because I don't know. Did you ever read the book Midnight Library by Matt Haig? It's a book about regrets. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And I started thinking when I read it about, do I have any regrets? And really the only regret I could come up with was that I'd never written a novel, that I thought I had one in me, at least one. And, and here I am retired, and I have some free time, and I'm able to go to school and spend the money on tuition. So that's what prompted me to go, to just give it a go. I guess it was a calling of some kind, where I felt like that would complete me, in my life journey if I wrote a book. And it was a great experience to sit down and write these characters and make these things happen to them and have a good outcome. Yeah.
So I was so intrigued by some of the things you were saying, I didn't quite catch the context. I think this was related to when we were talking about light. You're right. If everyone was blind, for instance, there would be a lot less conflict. And then this response here, which is a fancy way of saying everyone's guilty. But I'm not totally sure the context. Maybe you have some insight into.
No, I was actually looking at the chat. I figured out how to look at the chat, and I don't really know at what point that person weighed in, so I'm not quite sure what they're referring to.
Maybe it's this is actually something I wanted to get into, and maybe this is a good place to end this on, is that what I loved about your story is you mentioned that Chris was making judgments along the way, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously you had your own theology and you had your own experiences. You wrote about a situation which wasn't only, a person being killed probably because of racial profiling. Maybe the race was involved in how that character died in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. But there was also, the presentation of the person who did not want to conform to the COVID lockdowns being the one that was causing a disturbance, right? Mm-hmm. So you're kind of taking a side on that in a way, right? Because there would be, again, my dad had the opposite perspective, that mm-hmm. these things were being imposed on everybody else and they didn't have the freedom, right? So anyway, and I'm not trying to get into that, but what I am getting into is that what I loved about your story is that, and this is also why I didn't, my older sister, I'm not sure exactly why she didn't sell our story, but various news media outlets wanted to buy our story, from her, from me, but we didn't want the story to be told in which somebody else is choosing who the hero is or who the victim is. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because in our situation, there weren't really any heroes and everybody was a victim. Right? You follow me? Yeah. And I got a little bit of that sense that Chris is kind of discovering that along her way. Surely there are opinions, there are judgments, but part of the journey was recognizing that we often make false judgments.
Yeah, it starts with a couple at the campground, Hannah and Wade, who are these loudmouth Texans with a huge RV that probably cost $1 million. And she just makes all these assumptions about them. And they turned out to be just real salt of the earth people who were very incredibly generous and giving when a crisis happened at the campground. So that was epiphany number one for her during the book. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of how Jesus taught in that, right? The story of the Good Samaritan, right? The Good Samaritan being obviously the Samaritan. Everyone at that time, when a Samaritan gets mentioned, oh, this is going to be good, right? Because the Samaritans are such bad people.
Yeah.
And then Jesus flips the script on them. Well, awesome. Well, we're at time. It's been just a very enjoyable hour with you to learn more deeply about your book, your life, what you're doing. Again, everyone's The Salt and Light Express, Leanne Walling. Go get the book if you haven't heard of it. It's well worth the read. Leanne, what would you like to leave our audience with this evening?
I wrote the book to try to encourage people to put themselves out there. I mean, that's part of the story, is that she finally realizes to get anywhere, to find love and belonging, you just have to put yourself out there. You can't close yourself off. And that's just true of so many different facets of life. And so if the book teaches people anything, that would be it. That it's never too late. Put yourself out there and you can pretty much achieve love, a novel, whatever, so, but thanks for having me. It's been a really great conversation. I appreciate it. And go have your anniversary.
Well, we have one more thing to do. Well, yeah, we did actually order dessert to take home with us. So there's key lime pie and there's some kind of funky, delicious cheesecake that we're all going to share. But one last thing that I have to do tonight is air the sneak peek of next week's show. And so, Leanne, thank you so much for being here this evening. Everyone go check out her book and order a copy for you or a friend. Join a book club, invited into your book club, and enjoy.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to come to your book. I'll drop in on any book club. Yep.
Awesome.
Okay.
In an RV, or are you flying in?
Virtually, unless you're in my neck of the woods.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That was one of the gifts that COVID gave us, was for us to be able to do that, right? To travel virtually much more easily and readily. All right. So stay tuned next week, same time, same place, on the Created in the Image of God show. This is what you have to look forward to. Meanwhile, don't forget, you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We'll see you all next week. Welcome to the studio, Jen Rosner.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So what was it like growing up, Jen, in a Jewish household?
Yeah, great place to start. So my parents are both Jewish. All of my grandparents are Jewish. My parents were both raised in the Jewish community in Los Angeles. My dad was raised in the conservative Jewish movement, if that means something to listeners. My mom was raised in the Reform Jewish movement. They got married in their early 20s and they moved to Northern California, to Lake Tahoe, California, which is where I was born and raised. I don't think they were planning to stay. I think it was just, supposed to be a fun little stint.
There is a war going on in the area of the world that is featured in the story of Esther. Jen, unpack that for us.
Yeah, so recently the Jewish community worldwide celebrated the holiday of Purim, which is remembering and living out the story that is told in the book of Esther. It takes place in ancient Persia, which is modern day Iran. And it tells the story of God's kind of work on behalf of his people, the Jewish people, to save the Jewish people from a tyrant who was very high up in the government named Haman. And it tells this sort of unlikely story of Queen Esther and the way in which through Queen Esther and Mordecai, God God saves his people from a tragedy that was set to eliminate the Jewish people in the Persian Empire. About how, we're celebrating and living out the story of Esther about, a plot against the Jewish people in ancient Persia. And we're watching in real time the news where, the Ayatollah who was kind of like a modern Haman and wanted to eliminate the state of Israel was sort of taken out, as I said, just days before Purim.